pleasure to be here, and I'm glad for some of the people that have come on for the first time. I'm very grateful for this opportunity with technology to be able to share. And we have been blessed, we've been encouraged. We have the opportunity now, after a song and a prayer, and a testimony as well, 2 testimonies, to be able to understand hopefully a little bit more about Revelation chapter 14, verses 7 through 12. This is, well, we looked at 6 last time, so I'm mentioning 7 now, but this is the 3 angels' messages. And the reason why this is important is because it really is a message that goes to the end, or to the world at the end of time. Now, you can actually see that in the book of Revelation itself. If you look at chapter 1, you see a picture of Jesus followed by 7 churches, okay? You look at chapter 5, which is followed by 7 seals. You look at chapter 8, and it's followed by 7 trumpets. That's the first half of the book of Revelation. A picture of Christ with 7 churches, picture of Christ with 7 seals, picture of Christ with 7 trumpets. Now, you're going to see another span of the same amount of time. What you have in the churches, seals, and trumpets is from when Christ was on the earth and ascended up until the time of his second coming. So it happens in the churches, it happens in the seals, and it happens in the trumpets. We're going to see the same thing again in chapter 12 through 16. What I mean is, chapter 12 is you have this woman that's described in chapter 1 with this baby in her belly. Well, after this baby is born and caught up to heaven, then you have the history of the church that leads her through the wilderness, which is on the earth, and also through the water. And then in chapter 13, you see the wilderness and the water. Well, it's actually this way. You see the water in the wilderness. You're seeing the water and the wilderness, which is the earth. And then you see the message that's going to be proclaimed at that time and afterwards. And right after that, chapter 15 shows the close of probation, and chapter 16 shows the final plagues, and that's when Christ comes. So this right before the close of probation in chapter 15, you have this 3 angels' messages in chapter 14. So what I'm saying is, chapters 12 through 16 shows the same amount of time from when Christ was here until when he comes back. And right toward the end of that, right before the close of probation, you see this 3 angels' messages. And that's what we're studying now, because this goes to the entire world. We've already looked at the word everlasting in verse 6, and we saw that all through the 70 plus times it's used in the Greek in the New Testament, it leads us to understand that everlasting can have a beginning, it can also have an end. But in most cases, it has a beginning that doesn't have an end. And that's where it comes in our life, where we accept the gospel. And for us, that experience begins, and then it continues on throughout the ceaseless ages, unless, of course, we accept our sins again instead of the victory that's in Christ. And so when we're contemplating the word everlasting, and then we saw the word the next time in the word gospel, and how 70 plus times it's used in the Greek New Testament, we saw that the gospel, that actually has a beginning as well. Just ask Mark in chapter 1, verse 1. But the gospel is all about the Father, it's all about the Son, it's about our salvation. And the last time out of the 70 that the New Testament uses the word everlasting is in Revelation 14, verse 6. And so to understand what everlasting means, we go through all the rest of the New Testament. I didn't go through all the Bible because we could spend a lot of time on that word. But just through the New Testament, we found that when you understand all of what's being said in the New Testament, and then you see how John used it the last time, there you go, now you can understand it a little bit better. The same thing with the word gospel. It's the last time that the book of the New Testament, it's the last time the New Testament uses that word gospel in all of the 70 plus times that it's used. Well, interestingly, the phrase fear God, it's made up of 2 words, and that's part of the next section we're going to be looking at. That phrase, fear God, only happens a few times, and the last time it's used is right here in Revelation chapter 14, verse 7. So we're seeing that you need to, in order to understand the book of Revelation, you need to understand at least some of what's being said in the other parts of the Bible. I would suggest going a little further and knowing all of what the Bible says in regard to those things, so that the book of Revelation becomes a little bit more clear. And that's what we're going to see here now in this section, Revelation 14, verse 7, is that it goes on to another appeal for us, those that are accepting the everlasting gospel. We're being appealed to fear God. Now, I've already done a message that deals with this idea of fearing God quite a bit. So instead of doing it here and hashing the same ground, I would just suggest that you go to the first presentation I did on the three angels' messages in Daniel chapters 1 through 6. It's on YouTube. I did it during the time I was at Secrets Unsealed. Now, that series goes through the three angels' messages found in Daniel chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And what's interesting is the three angels' messages are found in chronological order through those chapters in the book of Daniel. And that's why I did that series. Well, I dealt quite a bit with this idea of fearing and what it means to fear in that first presentation. So please go there and check it out. But now, what we're going to do is go through some of the ideas that are found further in these three angels' messages. We'll read verse 6 first. I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, and he had, what we looked at before, the everlasting gospel, and it was to preach. Now, Christ did a lot of teaching, he did a lot of preaching, and he did a lot of healing. We are called at this time with these messages to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. I saw folk today from lots of places, Lithuania and Kenya and Ethiopia and Canada and all sorts of different locations in this world. Sometimes we have people from Australia and other areas of the world as well. So this is a message for everybody that dwells on the earth, every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. That's me, that's you. He says with a loud voice, fear God. Okay, this idea of fearing God. We're going to look at that phrase, but first, I want to go ahead and show you something. If I were to go and right-click on this word in this program, search for the word, that would take me to, I'm going to do that first. You're going to see that'll take me to 400 different times this word is used. I'm going to zoom out and show you that at the top here, that's where you can see this word fear is used. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth. This is after the flood. This is after the curse of sin. And so the beasts of the earth are going to be afraid of you, okay? So this is actually a fear. And so this is fear as well. The fear of God is not in this place, as you can see with Abraham saying that to those that he was interacting with, but we're going to look specifically at the Greek word fear, okay? So I'm going to zoom in again, and we're going to look at this idea of searching for not the word itself, but the key number. And the reason why this key number is going to bring up the Greek is because this word fear right here in Revelation chapter 14, verse 7, is in the New Testament, and it's going to be looking up the Greek. And so what I'm going to do is show you that there are 93 different times that this word is used in the New Testament because we've looked up the specific Greek Strong's number, okay? Now the first time it's used is in Matthew 1:20. While he thought on these things, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a dream, saying, Joseph, thou son of David, fear not to take unto thee Mary thy wife. Now, what kind of fear would that be? That would not be respect. That would actually be, don't be afraid, because this woman was already thrown out of her home. She was, well, not entirely, but she was, how would you say? She was rejected by her parents, at least at first, because they thought this woman has just gotten pregnant without us knowing who she is going to marry. I mean, this is having children out of wedlock. That was absolutely unheard of for the Israelites. In fact, you could be stoned to death for that. And this man, if he were to accept her, then he would be admitting that he was the one that slept with her before they were married. And they would both die by being stoned to death. And so this fear not to take Mary unto you to wife is actually not about respect. This is a fear. This is an actual honest fear. Like, don't be afraid. Or also, don't be embarrassed to take Mary unto you to wife, right? So that's this concept here. In chapter 2, verse 22, he was afraid to go there. This is Joseph again being told of an angel to go to a specific place, but because that Archelaus was reigning in the room of his father, he was afraid to go there. Why? Because he felt like this guy was not even, he wasn't better than his father, he was worse, right? So he was actually fearful to go there. Well, Jesus said, fear them not therefore, for there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, and hid that shall not be known. So don't be afraid or embarrassed or treating them as though they have some place, because in the context here, he's just saying, don't be afraid of them. Now here he's saying, don't be afraid of them which kill the body. Now, if somebody's going to kill you, you would probably be honestly afraid. And in fact, in most cases, it would probably happen that way. This is not about respect, it's about fear. But they're not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. And so this is an honest fear, and this is an appeal to honest fear as well, because he is able to destroy both soul and body, right? Not them which can only kill the body but are not able to kill the soul. So there's a fear here and a fear here, but this one seems like it should be a greater fear because he's able to destroy both soul and body. Like I'm thinking about Exodus chapter 20, verse 20. Notice what Moses said. Moses said unto the people, fear not. I'm going to look up this word fear by triple clicking that word, and it brings up the Hebrew Strong Dictionary. This word is to affright, right? To frighten, morally to revere or to fear. And so that's what this idea is. Moses said unto the people, fear not, because for God is come to prove you, and that his fear may be before your faces, that you sin not. Now, watch this. I'm going to triple click this word, and we're going to see 3372. And that's the one we just looked at earlier. And it was like to morally revere, to be affright, dread, etc., right? To see something as terrible or have reverence. 3372. But you don't want to fear, Moses said to the people, because God has come to prove you, so that his fear may be before your faces, that you sin not. Now, what is this word? I'm going to triple click it. This is 3374, not 3372. Because remember this one, the first one, 3372. Now I'm going to go to this other one again, right here, 3374. And this is to fear, morally, reverence, dreadful, exceeding fearfulness. Okay? So what is happening is Moses is saying, don't be afraid, because God has come to prove you that his exceeding fear might be before your faces, that you sin not. And so his fear in this context, after he gave the 10 Commandment law, was so that his people would not sin. Okay, they would choose to be afraid of his judgments, and as a result, they would fear him. Now I know, fearing God is not certainly the most appealing way to evangelize. Like God is going to crush you. He's going to, condemn sin and destroy it. That's not the way we evangelize, but it is a healthy fear that we can have. That's not the only way that the New Testament uses the word fear. That's why I'm going through this and trying to explain a little bit, is because there is that fear that we can have. Like, I remember when I first became a Christian, I was fearful of some of the things that I had done and the judgments that would come. Now I'm not so fearful because I truly believe that I'm living in the sight of a holy God with a pure conscience. And as a result, I don't find that God is going to crush me. He's going to be merciful to bring me through these things that I have away with or gone away from. And I believe he will, as it says in Philippians 1:6, he will continue that work which he has begun in me to complete it, right? To finish it. And so I can trust that God is working in me, and as long as I'm committed to him and willing to not only study his word but surrender to it, he will continue to lead me away from those things that he will judge. And so that's a healthy fear, right? Well, notice as we continue on, don't fear them which kill the body only, but fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Fear ye not, therefore, you are more valuable than sparrows. So don't be afraid. That's just an honest fear. And then let's see, when he would put him to death, he feared the multitude. This is talking about John the Baptist and Herod. Herod feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. He feared that the multitude would turn around and have some kind of riots. Okay, so this was a healthy fear as well, a good place to be. Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. When the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. And that's when he started to cry, Lord, save me. This is Peter in the boat, right? He didn't want to fall. He didn't want to go into a raging torrential lake. He was afraid, the Bible says. They were sore afraid. Be not afraid. We fear the people. They feared the multitude. I was afraid. They feared greatly, saying, truly this was the Son of God. Now, here, after the earthquake, after Christ had died, And after they were condemned and in their own conscience, they feared greatly. And as a result of this fear, they admitted that Jesus truly was the Son of God, as he had said. Now, don't be afraid. Be not afraid. They feared exceedingly and said, what manner of man is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? So when the disciples were able to be in the boat and they saw what manner of man he was and how that the winds and the seas obey him, they feared exceedingly. Okay, so this is probably mixed with a reverence, but also a fear. Because I would probably be afraid if somebody came to my house, there was a thunderstorm, lightning and all these things, wind and going on, and it was like, silence, be still, and everything just stopped. I'd be like, whoa, what's going on here? That would bring a real fear into my heart, but also at the same time a reverence, because they'd already seen this man, Jesus, perform miracles, and they had seen and understood him in a different way. So yes, it was unusual for him, but it wasn't like the craziest thing in the world for just a random friend to pop up and say something like that and everything changes. But the idea is that this is a reverential fear. Okay, now there are some verses that you can see plainly it's reverence, and but in a lot of cases that same exact word is actual fear. And that's why the angels, when they came, or Christ, when he showed up, he said, fear not, don't be afraid, it's I. And so, let's see, they were afraid. There was a woman fearing and trembling, so this is a real honest fear. And then it says, be not afraid. Herod feared John. We had read that earlier in Matthew. It is I, don't be afraid. And then I'm going to skip through a lot of these verses because it's kind of saying the same thing, but there are some that I want to be able to see. And I don't have them directly marked, but I do know that I've seen them and I want to see them again. So, being afraid, they wondered, saying one to another, what manner of man is this? For he commands even the winds and the water to obey him. So that's the same thing we just talked about before. And they were afraid and they wondered. And so, again, he was clothed in his right mind. This is one of the guys that had the devil cast out of him. And they were afraid. Don't be afraid. They feared and entered into the cloud. This was here one of the times where I think that the disciples had a deep respect, a deep awe. While he thus spake, this is Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, there came a cloud and overshadowed them, and they feared as they entered into the cloud. They were told to come in, but they were reverenced. Jesus was being transformed in front of them, and they were in awe, okay? Now they feared to ask him what he meant when they didn't understand what Jesus was saying. Again, same thing Jesus had said before. Let's see. There was in a city a judge which did not fear God, neither regarded man. So he esteemed himself more highly than he did God as a judge, and he esteemed himself more than he regarded man as well. So this is like a disrespect where you fear not God, okay? He said in the same story, though I fear not God nor regard man, so he was admitting it, he knew it, I feared you because you were an austere man. I reverenced you because you were an austere man, and you take up what you laid not down and reap what you do not sow. So this guy wasn't probably necessarily afraid of that man, but he was, or perhaps he was. I would say that he may have been. They feared the people. They feared the people. Dost thou not fear God, seeing thou art in the same condemnation, the thief on the cross said? And so, don't you have respect for God, seeing you are in the same condemnation? I mean, look at, God isn't here on the cross. It's his Son that is. But don't you respect his Father? Don't you respect God? Because remember, Jesus was talking with them on the cross there, and they were afraid. It is I, be not afraid. They feared the Jews, so this was an actual honest fear. Fear not, daughter of Sion, behold your king comes, sitting upon an ass's colt. And so don't be afraid, don't lose heart, if you will. And so as we continue on now to the book of Acts, then went the captain with the officers and brought them without violence, for they feared the people. This is an honest fear because of the people and the kind of outrage that would come, right? lest they should have been stoned. So the people would have stoned them if they would have taken these people with violence, but they took them without violence because of the riots that would occur. So they were all afraid of him, and because Saul had come, and they didn't believe that he was the one that was now a converted Christian. He was supposed to be one of the persecutors, but now they were afraid of him because of all the things that he had done before, taken the Christians to the persecutors or to the judges, and also he held the coats for the ones that stoned, what's his name now, Stephen, right? So a devout man and one that feared God with all his house. Okay, so Acts 10 makes it clear that a devout man can fear God. Same exact word. You can see that it's highlighted in red here, right? So all these words, some of them being what means to be afraid. Some of them, if you fear not, it would be like a disrespect. Some have a devout heart and they fear God with their house. And so you're seeing that there's a reverence and a fear and a respect that's all mixed together. Now, this word, depending on the context, can mean one way or the other. We do the same thing in English. And so this idea of having a fear for God, it's very important to have, because he will judge sin. That is a real fear that we ought to have as humans. Whether we're saved or not, we can have that fear because it is a real, honest situation that will occur. He will judge sin, and he will destroy it. But to, bite your nails and tremble because God is going to do that is not the response that we should have. The response that we should have is to accept his Son. His Son was sent so that we would have victory over sin. If we can have victory over sin, then there will be nothing for God to judge in our life, and there's no longer our need for us to be afraid of him like that. But we can respect him for what he has asked, and that's in fact why we have turned away from our sin, is because I believe he's right. He's being honest. He's going to destroy me if I hold on to sin. And if we do hold on to sin, we will be destroyed. So there's a mixture of fear that comes with actually being afraid and having tremendous respect. So the fear God is a mixture of both. Now, I have heard that people will say, and I used to say also, that the fear of the Lord, like to have fear for God, is not to be afraid of him. Well, yes, it is. It is to be afraid of him for what he will do. Okay, why? Fear God and give glory to him. Why? Because the hour of his judgment is come. And so if God is going to judge, then we need to be afraid of him, you see? And we need to respect him for what he says, so that when he does judge, we will be in sync with what he is asking us to do. We can't do that by ourselves. It's impossible. It is Christ in you, the hope of glory, right? So this idea of fearing God, we didn't look at all of them. We just skimmed through the Gospels and went a little bit into the book of Acts. But you can see as you continue to go through, you're going to see fear and you're going to see respect. But I think it's a mixture of both, okay, when we're talking about God. So let's go back to Revelation chapter 14, verse 7, and see what we find when we look up the phrase fear God. And what we will do is close out this and go to this section again with a loud voice. By the way, this is a megaphone. Okay, loud is megas, and then you have this word, which, triple click, which is phone. Okay, megaphone. That's where you get that idea of a megaphone, the loud voice. So saying with a megaphone. Some people are like, you know what? This idea of God and who he is, it's not really that important. Oh yeah, well, why is the angel saying fear him with a megaphone, right? That's not... I don't know if you've ever yelled in somebody's ear, but that's kind of what I'm imagining is there's this megaphone that's being shouted throughout the world, fear God and give glory to him. By the way, it does not say give glory to them. I'm just saying, it's fear God and give glory to him. Who's this him? We're going to see a little bit more as we continue. So because I've selected this, and in this program I right-click and search for the word, it's going to bring up the phrase fear God. So if I were to search for this phrase right here, I just select it and then right-click and search for that word or that phrase. But in this idea, there's only 10 times that this phrase fear God comes into the Bible. And Joseph at first, he said the third day, this do and live, for I fear God. I read this story this morning. I just wanted to read the context of it, but I read the whole story, which is quite long, just because it's so interesting and how God was using Joseph to kind of work with his brothers, etc. Well, I fear God. As a faithful Jew who was living in Egypt, as a leader in Egypt, he feared God. So in other words, you never know where God has his people planted, right? So this is a respect generally, but also he was afraid to go against God because he knows that God is going to judge. Moreover, thou shalt provide out of all the people able men, such as these able men that fear God. Now this is Jethro speaking to Moses, and these are men of truth, they're hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands and hundreds and fifties and tens. So these people that fear God, they love truth and they hate covetousness. This is the kind of fear that God is looking for. A healthy fear, you're afraid of God for what he will judge, because he will judge lies, he will judge covetousness, he will judge those that are contrary to his will, right? So there's a healthy fear here and a respect for God. And that's how God wanted his people established in this new order of service that Jethro was suggesting to Moses. Well, Satan knew what the phrase meant. Satan answered and said, "Doth Job fear God for nothing?" So Satan knew from God's own voice that Job was the guy who, well, actually Satan said himself that Job was the guy that feared God. And you can read about that in the first verses just before that. But Satan knew what fearing God meant. It means he had more respect for God and he feared him for his judgments forthcoming, more than he feared Satan and his judgments for fearing God. So Job's choices were to be on God's side, not on Satan's side. So David says, "Come and hear, all ye that fear God, and I will declare what he hath done for my soul." So anybody who fears God should be interested in hearing what God has been doing for my soul. Anybody who has respect for God and a healthy fear for him, then come on down, because I've got plenty to say, kind of like the testimonies we heard this morning. Though a sinner do evil 100 times, Solomon said, his days be prolonged, yet surely I know that it shall be well with him that fears God, or fear God, which fear before him. So now this word fear, I'm going to see it's the second one, which is what Moses used in Exodus 20:20, 33:73, not 72. It's from this one, 72, but it's a word that is fearing, morally reverent, right? And so we're going to see here that which fear before God. This is 33:72. This is the different word. So David's doing a very similar thing that what Moses did. It will be well with them that morally fear God, which also are afraid of him. Okay, so we have two fears here in Ecclesiastes, and that's what he's saying to those that are interested in his letters. Well, here, of course, let us hear the conclusion of the matter, fear God, and keep his commandments. Wait a minute. This is like the first angel's message, and this is the third angel's message. They that keep the commandments of God, this is the whole duty of man, right? So Ecclesiastes ended his letter with almost the three angels' messages in this last little summation here. What about in the New Testament? So the other answered, rebuking him, said, and we've already seen this, "Dost thou not fear God, seeing thou art in the same condemnation?" So this is the thief on the cross asking about fearing God to the one who was rebuking Christ instead of asking him for salvation. Paul stood up beckoning with his hand, "Men of Israel, and ye that fear God, give audience." So people that are interested in what Paul is saying would be those that fear God. So again, this is a reverence for God and a healthy fear. Love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. Okay, that's what Peter is saying. And so we could love the brothers. This would be probably Philadelphia. No, this is agapeo. Look at that. So agapeo, the brotherhood, and this might be Philadelphia. Nope. But so agape the brothers, fear God. You would think it would say agape God, right? But nope, fear God and honor the king. And so you've seen those: love, peace, and life or things like that. They ought to have love, fear, and honor. We ought to make our own Christian plaques like that. But here's the very last time that that phrase is used, saying with a loud voice, fear God. Now, who is this God? Okay, let's talk about that for a minute. Fear God and give glory to Him, because the hour of His judgment has come. Now, I want to go real quick to John and chapter 5, verse 17. My Father is working, and I work. The Son of Man can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do, for whatsoever thing he does, these also the Son does likewise. And then it says, the Father loves the Son and shows him all things that he himself does, and he will show you greater things than these. The Father raises the dead, and so the Son will too. Notice what it says here. The Father judges no man. So obviously the Son has just started saying that he is educated by his Father. The Father judges no man, but has committed all judgment unto the Son. Why? Because it says in verse 27, I believe it is, he hath committed authority to execute judgment also, because, this is why, he is the Son of Man. And so God the Father has given judgment over to the Son, and it's because the Son is and has been through the human experience. But the Father teaches him how to do all things. So the Father has already taught him how to judge. There's a really powerful book. It's called The Spirit of Prophecy. If you go to the first volume of The Spirit of Prophecy and you read the paragraph 22.2, so 1 SP 22.2. If you read that, you'll be able to see that the Father gathered everybody to himself in the heavens. And he was going to disperse between those who were worshiping him and those who would not. So the very first time the Son learned of judgment was there with the Father. So the Father taught him how to do it. And that's when he was on the earth saying the same thing. As a human now, the Father is teaching me how to judge and has committed all judgment unto me because I am the Son of Man. So I walked in your footsteps. And so now I have the ability to judge. So really when it says fear God and give glory to him because the hour of his judgment has come, whose judgment is it? Well, Jesus is the one that's been committed all the judgment, but who gave it to him? It was the Father that gave it to him. So truly the Father is the one that is judging through his Son. And so fear God and give glory to him because the hour of his judgment is come. Whose judgment? It's Christ's judgment. I'm sorry, God the Father's judgment through Christ. Let me say it better that way. So when it's saying fear God and give glory to him, we are talking about God the Father, knowing that he gave judgment to his Son. But let's also ask Jesus for a second, because we could just, conclude, yeah, maybe that'll fit. But let's ask Jesus what he thinks about who this God is and whether we should believe on him and fear him, etc. Let's turn to a couple of verses. The first one will be in John chapter 14 and verse 1. Let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, and that's a wonderful thing. You should. Believe also in me. So wait a minute. You already believe in God. We know that. And Jesus is speaking to the disciples that were with him for 3.5 years already. You believe in God. Believe also in me. You see how that's working? And so this also in me proves that they already believe in God. And there's another one to believe in also, which is his Son. And that's why he said, in my Father's house, which is God. And so you believe in God. Fear him, right? Well, just a couple of verses later in John 17, verse 3, we can say, this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom thou hast sent. So Jesus is saying, the only true God is his Father. And so fear God and give glory to him. To who? To the Father that has judgment. And he's given all judgment to his Son, but truly it is his judgment who gave it to his Son. You see how that works? There's another verse that I want to go to. It's at the very end of 1 John chapter 5, and it's verse 20. This one has caught a lot of people off guard because they think that it's saying that Jesus is the true God, right? But let's try to understand. We know that the Son of God, that's who we're talking about here, the Son of God is come. How did he come? Because God sent him. and he has given us an understanding. Okay, so the Son of God has come to give us an understanding. That, here's what the understanding is, that we may know him that is true. So what did the Son do? The Son came to give us an understanding of his Father. You can ask him, you just go and read the book of John. So the Son of God's given us an understanding that we might know him that is true. And we are in him that is true. How? In his Son. So in him that is true, how are we in him that is true? In him that is true's Son. You see how that works? We are in him that is true, in his Son, Jesus Christ. This, the one that we're in, this is the true God and eternal life. That's exactly what Jesus was saying in John chapter 17, verse 3. This is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom thou hast sent. Right? So Jesus Christ was come or sent to give us an understanding of him that is true, which is the one that has a Son. And we're in him that is true through his Son. This is the true God. So if you're just asking the Bible a few simple questions, you're going to be able to understand that God the Father is the only God that has no God. He is the one true God, and he has a Son. That Son is taken from him or begotten from him. As a result, the Son is also divine, just as his Father is. And that's why he could say in John 5:26, as the Father has life in himself, so has he given to the Son to have life in himself. And so what we're having here in Revelation chapter 14, verse 6 is not, or rather 7, is not Jesus Christ. Fear God and give glory to him. That is God the Father. Notice a little bit more as we contemplate this verse. Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. We know that the hour of his judgment began in 1844. We can look at that next time we're together in a brief overview, because I just did that in the book of Daniel, so there's no need to really go over it again here, whereas you'll be able to see it there. But what it's saying is the hour of his judgment is come. Now his judgment, whose judgment are we talking about? Well, this is the hour of God the Father's judgment. You see, God the Father has put himself on trial. You can read about this in the book of Romans. God forbid, yea, LGBT. Okay, there it is, LGBT. Let God be true. God forbid, yea, let God be true, but every man a liar, as it is written, that thou mightest be justified in thy sayings, and might overcome when thou art judged. When who is judged? When God is judged, right? So God has put himself on trial. This is really quite interesting, because what happens is when God makes a decision in the judgment that he has made through his Son, appointing his Son as the judge because he became the Son of Man, but it's really God's judgment. When he has come to his verdict based on what he's given to his Son, he's going to be the one on trial. Because if somebody is not in heaven, and God has said you can't be brought into heaven, the question is, God, why not? Well, let God be true and every man a liar. And it will be thus when God is judged. You can learn more about that in Revelation 15. It says, just and true are thy ways, thou King of saints. Who shall not fear thee, O Lord, and glorify thy name? For thou alone art holy. For thy judgments are made manifest. So God's judgments, the one alone who is holy, and Christ revealed that holiness through his life on earth. And we can read about that in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. You can just go and find out that God is the one who has given us his righteousness, which was revealed in his Son. And so God is the one that is the one that will be, how would you say, justified in his sayings, as it says there in Romans chapter 3. Because if somebody's not in heaven and God says you can't be here, you're going to ask God the question, why not, God? And he's going to show you all the history of how he, through his agents, was trying to win the soul of whoever it was that's not in heaven. And if that person is not there in heaven, and you've seen the articles and the books and the descriptions of all of what God had tried to do to save this person, you're going to be able to say, just as it says in Revelation 15, just and true are thy ways, O King of saints. Who shall not fear thee, O Lord, and glorify thy name, for thou art holy. and thy judgments have been made manifest. Because we're going to be able to see his judgments made manifest or displayed. If somebody's in heaven you thought they shouldn't be there, you're going to ask, why is he here? And they're going to be able to show the same exact thing. You're going to see all of what that person did in response to God's appeals, and that person will have turned to the Lord, and you're going to be able to see it written out. Who knows, maybe we'll be able to see visuals of it, the whole like HD, heavenly definition TVs, and we'll be able to see like what it really was that God did. Not from our earthly, very shadowy perspective like it says in 1 Corinthians 13, but rather we're going to see with clarity, this is what God did. And we're going to say, wow. It's going to be amazing. So it's actually the hour of God's judgment, right? So when he is judged, and he's preparing for that time where we're going to be in heaven for 1,000 years, it says in Revelation chapter 20, and we're going to be able to look at all the things he declared as one way or the other. He's either lost or he's saved. And he will be the one that is judged at that time. So it's God doing it through his Son, but we also know that it is him that Jesus was saying we ought to believe as the only true God. John said it in 1 John chapter 5. Jesus said it in his prayer in John 17. Jesus said it to the disciples about that you need to believe in God. You do believe in God. Believe also in me, his Son. And so we have this concept of some people saying that the God of Revelation 14:7 is Jesus. I would argue that it's not. And there are other reasons why, but that's the first part of this that we're going to go through in Revelation chapter 14, verse 7. Fear God and give glory to him. Now, we haven't looked at the glory aspect. We may look at that tomorrow, and the idea more of the give glory to him and the hour of his judgment. We're going to try to see that in another perspective, going just a bit into the book of Daniel, and then we'll be able to know that this is dealing with the Father judging through his Son, and that when it says even at the last part of Revelation chapter 14 verse 7, for example, worship him that made heaven and earth, the sea, and the fountains of waters. I used to believe that this was specifically Jesus. Worship him that made. Jesus was the creator. And I believe that that's true, but the Bible teaches that it was God through his Son that made all things, heaven, earth, the sea, and all the fountains of waters. And so truly it is God the Father that created through his Son, just like God the Father will judge through his Son. And that's why here I believe it is fear God the Father and give glory to him. And not them, but him. And so God is one, he has a Son, and God has done judgment and creation through his Son. So with a megaphone voice, let us continue to declare as loudly as possible, fear God and give glory to him. We're going to talk about that later, but let's just be thankful for what God has given to us. In the understanding that we do have, some of us have more than others, that's fine. You may understand some things more than I do. I may understand some things more than you do. But let's all continue to grow together to the end that we fear God and fear him aright. Fear him in such a way that it turns us from the things of this world and guides us directly to the kingdom of heaven. Now, there's going to be a lot of trials before we get there, but I believe God is faithful and he will see us through. If we are committed to him, he is committed to us. I truly believe that. So let's pray together, asking God for his blessings, and then we will have a few comments before we go. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, I want to thank you for giving us this time that we can be able to know and understand what it is that you're saying and doing in all of your words and thoughts that you have written in the Holy Bible. Thank you for giving us that, your word, that we can be able to understand it a little bit more today and a little bit more tomorrow and more the next day, so that we can share it and teach it and help people to understand what it is that you are saying about yourself and how that we can be brought to fear you. There is an honest fear that we can have, but if we get away from the sin that you've called us to get away from, we don't need to have that kind of fear. We can have more of a reverence for what you have done and will do. So please continue to lead and guide us that we can understand this truth and the practicality of fearing you. I know that those that fear you will turn away from sin, as we have talked about in that series in the book of Daniel. And help us please to continue to learn and understand a little bit more, so that in our practical lives we can reflect you even that much more. Thank you for this, and bless us. in preparation for the coming of your Son. In His name, Jesus Christ. Amen. I see somebody wrote in the commentary the reference that I referred to in 1 Spirit of Prophecy 22.2. I'll read it with you guys real quick. All the heavenly host were summoned to appear before who? The Father. To have each case determined. By who? The Father. Satan unblushingly made known his dissatisfaction that Christ should be preferred before him. He stood up proudly and urged that he should be equal with God and should be taken into conference with the Father and understand his purposes. God informed Satan that to his Son alone he would, what's the next word? Reveal his secret purposes. You know what that means? Is that the Son did not know the secret purposes of the Father. And he required all the family in heaven, even Satan, to yield him, his Son, implicit, unquestioned obedience, but that he, Satan, had proved himself unworthy a place in heaven. Then Satan exultingly pointed to his sympathizers, comprising nearly 1/2 of all the angels, and exclaimed, "These are with me. Will you expel these also and make such a void in heaven?" He then declared that he was prepared to resist the authority of Christ and to defend his place in heaven by force of might, strength against strength. So that is a really powerful paragraph, if you haven't contemplated that one before.